Hold on one second. Theo. I'm so glad that the barking dog is now being recorded. Anyway, welcome all and happy June. It's hard to believe it is Wednesday, June 1st. I want to welcome everyone who's joining us this morning. We are being both recorded and live streamed. And I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, these recordings are now archived for 3 years. Is that correct?
Good morning, Vice Chair Reynolds. And yes, effective June 1, the law will change, and I'll explain that later. So
okay.
I assume we will just go to that process now, but I think that will be the plan.
All right. Thank you, sir. With that, Secretary Perry, let's make it official and call the roll this morning.
Yes, ma'am. In accordance with TCA 844-108C3, there are 2 questions that will need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these 2 questions. Governor Lee, Regent Apple, Regent Burdine.
Yes to both.
Regent Duckett.
Yes to both.
Regent George. Regent Gill. Regent Green.
Yes to both.
Regent Hatch, and he'll be joining us a little later this morning. Commissioner Hatcher. Regent Powers.
Yes to both.
Regent Reed.
Yes to both.
Vice Chair Reynolds.
Yes to both.
Commissioner Schwinn. Regent Thompson.
Yes to both.
Regent Barlin.
Yes to both.
Regent Womp.
Yes to the first, no to the second. My wife is here. It's our 9th anniversary.
Oh. Wow.
So that's part of the reason I'll be intermittent.
Congratulations. That's great.
Thanks.
Yes. Regent White.
Yes to both.
Thank you. Regent Shelton.
Yes to both.
Thank you. And Regent House. Madam Chair, your board is assembled.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Our second item of business is one that you guys are familiar with by now as well, and that is our necessity to meet electronically. Having our committee chairs meeting, of course, is our most economically efficient way to gather in a timely manner to discuss items that we typically review in advance of our quarterly meeting, which we know is coming up on June 16 and 17. Given that this necessity to meet electronically is a non-controversial and a routine item, I would propose once again that we approve this by unanimous consent. Of course, we can have a roll call vote if there are any objections, but at this time I would like to see if there is no objection, that necessity to meet electronically would be adopted by unanimous consent. Do we hear any objections? Hearing none, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted, and I thank you all. Chancellor, any opening remarks for us this morning?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone. I would like to take just a moment and to congratulate Weston, first of all, on your 9th anniversary, but also on your recent win in the primary for the Hamilton County Mayor. We're very proud to have you on our board and congratulate you on your win. So,
very nice.
I'd also like to take a moment and just update the board on 2 items very briefly. One is just a little quick update on Blue Oval City. I think many of you are aware that we have now hired an executive vice president reporting to Dr. Jeff Sisk at TCAT Jackson. The new TCAT will be a branch of TCAT Jackson until it's able to stand up on its own. The individual hired is Heath McMillan, and Heath comes to us from Northeast State, where he managed the RCAM Center. We stole him away from Miles area to get him over to West Tennessee for this most important project, and we're really excited about having him on board. The selection committee did include representatives from Ford, the Department of Labor, and TBR. And so I know that he is going to do a great job, and we'll continue to hear from him as he progresses in this position. Dick Tracy and his team are continuing to work on the TCAT Blue Oval City design plan, which we are expecting to take to State Building Commission in July. We do have members from the Ford team working on that project as well, giving us their input as we do the planning for that. Site work is also expected to begin in July, and as you all recall, we are expecting a completion date of first quarter of 2024. The Ford plant construction is expected to be completed by the end of 2024 or the first quarter of 2025. TBR has also been working on 13 additional sites, preparing to deliver the training that's going to be needed to meet the workforce need for Ford. Since our March board meeting, TBR hosted a curriculum meeting with Ford and all TBR West Tennessee campuses. And last week, the TBR team met with the Department of Labor and Ford and discussed the curriculum and the in-depth entry-level position requirements. By January 2023, workforce training will be completely in place at all of our campuses and sister institution locations. At our board meeting, Dr. Puryear, Dr. Sisk, and Executive Vice President Heath McMillan are going to be prepared to give you a much more detailed and update overview of the project. And then one other item that I would just like to mention this morning is that at the June 16th meeting, Vice Chancellor Gibbs will be presenting the staff recommendation regarding tuition and mandatory and non-mandatory fees. We are going to be asking for 0 increase on all of these again this year. And so just wanted to give that information to you ahead of time. That THEC is also going to be asking that everyone hold at 0, and we know that we are able to do that. So that will be our recommendation coming to you as a board. And so, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Good report. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Chancellor? All right, thank you. We now turn to Executive Vice Chancellor Danny Gibbs, who is counting the days until his departure from us, but he's going to go out with a bang. He's been doing a lot of work on a variety of fronts, including some policy updates that I gather, Danny, we will see on our consent agenda at this upcoming meeting, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, my friend, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, we're going to be presenting to you basically 3 policies today, and if it's okay, I'll go ahead and really take the first 2 together. They're very closely related, and they relate to the fees, charges, refunds, and adjustments for the community colleges and the TCATs. Currently, we have a policy and we have a guideline for the community colleges that deal with payment of student fees and charges and refunds and so forth. And what we want to do is to merge those 2 into one document, into one policy. Just for a little bit of history, historically, the board has approved policies. The campus presidents have approved guidelines, but we'll be merging the guideline with the policy and have one new policy. Also, currently, the policy and the guideline that relate to payment of student fees, they relate both to the community colleges and to the TCATs. And in addition, the TCAT also has a third guideline that relates to their fees and refunds. So what we want to do is in addition to merging these policy and guidelines together, we also want to split them out and have an individual policy for the community colleges and an individual policy for the TCATs. Because while they're similar, there are some differences between the TCATs and the community colleges, and having it all in one policy, quite frankly, was a little bit confusing at times. You know, for example, the TCATs deal in the clock hour environment, the community colleges deal in the credit hour environment. So some of the rules and some of the practices are a little bit different. So we wanted to go ahead and split those out. So in the materials that were sent to you, that's the reason you see basically two documents, one for the community colleges and one for the TCATs. Next slide, please. So I do want to give some highlights of some of the changes. Again, we're merging them, but there are a few revisions that we're including along the way as well. One of the things that we are proposing is that we remove the terminology maintenance fees. And instead, going forward, we will be using in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition. And as you all know, probably outside of those that work in higher ed in Tennessee, in the TBR or LGI system, no one else knows what maintenance fees mean. They don't equate that to tuition. So we're going to remove that language from our policy and going forward start just referring to these simply as in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition or just collectively as tuition. And hopefully that'll be a little bit clearer for our students. Fees for courses requiring materials or services that are required or recommended by faculty and are a direct pass-through of the actual cost charged by a third-party provider may be approved by the Chancellor and reported to the board as an interim action item. You know, there's been honestly some confusion in the past on whether these items needed board approval or not. So we just want to clarify that if it is actually a direct pass-through of the actual cost, there's no markup by the campus, the school isn't making any money off this, that the Chancellor can approve those and that they'll be reported to the board as an interim action item. And one example that we see often is in the healthcare and nursing. You know, there is a preparation course basically that the students can take, just a prep to get them ready for the state boards. It's often required by our faculty, and there's a cost for that. But again, it's not marked up by the campus, and it's just again for the students' benefit to prepare them for the state boards. That would be an example of the type thing we're looking at. There's also some industry certifications that it's important for the students to have as they're seeking employment. You know, so that's another example of the type charge that would be assessed to the student with no markup, and that would be approved by the Chancellor. The removing the designation for Pool 1 and Pool 2 of the technology access fee revenue. And there's probably a lot of people that maybe don't even realize there is a Pool 1 and Pool 2 because this goes back almost 25 years. You know, in the beginning when the technology access fee was originally passed, then a few years later, there was a revision an increase in the fee, and there were kind of two sets of rules. And really, we want to just merge that all together into one pool and basically one set of rules going forward. And again, the overall premise is the technology access fee has to be used for related to student technology, and that is still true in this revised policy. Also related to TAF, currently there is a requirement that 25% of the institution's TAF spending plans be reviewed by TBR staff and reported to the board. Compliance with the TAF guidelines will still be subject to audit by internal audit staff. If you recall, in September each year, I bring to you all basically just a report for your information that says that staff has looked at 25% of the TAF spending plans and have found them to be okay and in compliance with policy. You know, we think this is something probably that doesn't add a lot of value anymore because we have been doing this almost 25 years. So any, you know, concerns were worked out long ago. Campuses still reach out to board staff if they've got a question on whether something, you know, qualifies, or they can reach out to internal audit if they have questions on whether something qualifies. We basically never find any issues when we're reviewing these reports, so we just don't think it really adds value. We do think the value that is still included in the policy is the fact that these will be subject to audit by internal audit, and I think that's the most important control that we have, is the audit can still look at these TAF expenditures and make sure campuses are spending them appropriately. The specialized academic course fee, we tweaked that just a little bit. We state that the fee must demonstrate the high cost of instruction, and that's really the purpose usually of the specialized academic course fee, a program fee, is that there's a high cost of a particular program and they need some supplemental revenue to help offset those costs. There are some other criteria that are also preferred, and they're still included in the policy, but the main requirement is the high cost of instruction. And also in the guideline, there was some appeals language in there, and it basically said that the campuses need an appeal process, and our campuses do have those appeals processes in place. Actually, their accrediting agencies require them to have an appeals process in place. So it was kind of a duplication for us to have that in the policy. So we've removed that language. So that's really kind of the highlights of some of the changes in the fee policies. There's also another policy that will be before you, the Institutional Financial Performance Review Policy. This is the policy that guides us when it comes to the CFIs, those ratios that we cover in the fall. And really what we want to do is to align the policy with current practices. We actually feel that our current practices, is stronger than the current policy. So we just want to update the policy to include those practices. One thing that we do, for example, board staff computes the ratios and the CFI scores and the trends in the adjusted unrestricted net assets that I report to you all in November. Policy says that the campuses will compute those, but we just found it was much easier since we have the data for all the schools, for us to compute those. So we're just clarifying the policy that we will compute those and provide those to the campuses instead of the other way around. We also added a requirement to monitor trends in unrestricted net position to determine the overall financial health of the institution and report those trends to the board. This is something that I've been doing for the last 5 years. In November, I reported that, and to me, this, quite frankly, is probably the best thing that we look at, is the trends in unrestricted net position, but that's not required in our policy. So we've added that requirement to the policy that we will calculate and review that and report those trends to the board. Then also, the change allows more latitude for the Vice Chancellor for Business and Finance to use professional judgment when determining variances that need to be explained in writing. Currently, the policy says that if there's any of those ratios that dips below the watch level, that the campus has got to submit a written narrative, correction active plan, etc. But we've learned over the last 5 years that that's not always necessary. There are times when a ratio may dip below the watch level, but we know why, and it's an acceptable reason on why maybe it's dipped below the watch level. And so really we're taking more of a holistic approach. We're looking at all the ratios combined. We're looking at the trends combined. We're looking at the changes in unrestricted net asset position. And based on that, then we want to determine whether or not an institution needs to submit a corrective action plan or explain some trends that may be of concern to us. So it just gives the Vice Chancellor more latitude to make that judgment call on when a written report is needed. It really, I think, strengthens the policy in relation to the things that are reported and discussed with the board. The things that I do in November with you all technically is not part of the policy. Now it will be that's a requirement. So I just think it strengthens it in that sense as well. So those are the three policies that'll be before you on the consent agenda at the June meeting. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to entertain those. If not, then that completes my review.
A lot of good work. Let me ask Regent Duckett, as chair of the Finance Committee, you're comfortable, obviously, with this approach on these?
Yes.
Executive Vice Chancellor Danny Gibbs and I, we have gone over them, and I am completely comfortable with the recommendations that will be advanced to the full board.
Thank you, sir. I'm very comfortable with changing maintenance fees to tuition. Simplification for our students and just the semantics of it to me is so much easier. Anybody else have anything for Mr. Gibbs on this? And again, you've seen the proposed changes that'll be in our materials one more time. So, well, Danny, good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. I'm going to turn back to Mariah for a moment because I understand that Regent Apple has joined us.
Yes, ma'am. Regent Apple, and we see you are on. Can you confirm that you can simultaneously hear and speak with us in the meeting? And second, are you alone in the room?
Yes to both questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Regent Apple, for joining us. I'd like to turn now to Vice Chancellor McCormick, and she's had a busy time in external affairs and will give us an update.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Chair Committee, and colleagues. Today I'll be providing a preview of the full presentation that our office will deliver during the External Affairs Committee of the June quarterly board meeting, and all 4 Office of External Affairs departments, Government Relations, Marketing and Digital Strategy, System-Wide Advancement, and Campus Safety and Security will be presenting. So in Government Relations, as you all know, the 112th General Assembly adjourned sine die on Thursday, April 28th. The Government Relations Department tracked hundreds of bills throughout the 2022 session, and close to 200 of those tracked bills were passed into law. During the External Affairs Committee meeting, I will walk you through an update on some particularly notable bills the team tracked this session. And if you notice here, the list is extensive. The legislation listed here will be highlighted during that committee meeting, but these are really just a mere sampling of the overall collection of bills that our Government Relations Department tracked throughout this year and through the entire General Assembly of the 112th General Assembly. At this time, though, I would like to ask General Counsel Brian Lapps to join me to take a slightly deeper dive into 3 selected bills that we think are of importance to the board, including the TBR Sunset Bill. There's an open meetings bill that is specific to electronic meetings, and the much discussed bill regarding divisive concepts in higher education. By the time our committee and full board meet, we hope that the legislative compilation will be complete. It's dependent upon action that still needs to happen on Capitol Hill, obviously, and we will have that posted to the website. Chuck and John are working really hard on that as we speak, but there is much processing again from the Capitol that has to take place before it can be finalized. So we will be able to present that to you all as soon as possible. The budget was transmitted, by the way, to the governor on May 23rd. And as you know, he has 10 days to sign that budget. So General Counsel Lapps, if you want to take over for a moment.
Thank you, Dr. McCormick, and good morning, everybody. The first 2 really affect the Open Meetings Act, so we wanted to talk about them in tandem. As Dr. McCormick mentioned, our Sunset Bill, Public Chapter 755, extends the life of the Board of Regents to June 30th, 2026. The auditors did make a couple of legislative recommendations, one of which was to correct a typo in the number of people on the board, but another one was also that we stream and archive the meetings of the standing committees. So this first piece of legislation is particular to the TBR as well as the LGIs. And then we get to the second one, which is a revision to the Open Meetings Act and applies to all entities, state, local, public, that the Open Meetings Act applies to. And what it does, it says that if a board conducts a meeting, which is essentially anything that must be noticed, and if the board permits participation by electronic means, which includes both video platforms such as Teams as well as phone participation, then the meeting must be open to the public through the same electronic means. It must also be recorded and posted to the website within 3 days. And going back to Vice Chair Reynolds' question earlier today, it must remain available for 3 years. So in other words, anytime the board conducts a meeting and somebody is permitted to participate electronically, it must be recorded and posted to the website. So this won't affect regular board meetings and committee meetings, which are already streamed and posted, but it does mean that going forward, committee chairs meetings will be streamed and posted. Meetings such as the upcoming retreat at Fall Creek Falls, which won't have electronic participation, won't be streamed, recorded, or posted on that. So essentially, it's an open government push that requires more things be posted to the internet as well as streamed. You may also notice some minor changes to upcoming agendas, which must have information about electronic participation that will be similar to what will be noticed. So I'll pause there in case anybody has any questions about the open meetings issues that I've just mentioned.
Madam Vice Chair, this is Greg. I have a question out of curiosity. As it relates to archiving the meetings for 3 years, is there a cost associated with that? And if so, was there any discussions around it, or is it so nominal that it doesn't matter?
Good question.
Yeah. I don't believe there is any cost or any significant cost to it. As most people on the call know, there can be fiscal notes attached to potential legislation, and the fiscal notes, if they're significant, will might affect the course of the discussion and the course of action that the General Assembly takes. I can't say that I looked hard at any fiscal note on this bill. I do not recall any fiscal note on this bill, and I really doubt that there is any significant charge or cost for us keeping things on the website. I think we may already keep them more than 3 years, and we'll have to figure out whether we want to continue to do that or not, but I'm not aware of any costs that there would be. And I just received a text from somebody who knows more about this than me, who says there is no cost. So thank you to Matthew Gann for that answer specifically.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Brian, let's resume.
Shall do. The next bill, or statute rather, is Public Chapter 818, which I talked about at length during the committee chairs meeting, which is the divisive concepts legislation. And so I won't spend as much time unless anybody has more questions on it. But just as a quick recap, this legislation does not prohibit or require the teaching of subject matter, and it explicitly states that it preserves First Amendment and academic freedom issues. It contains 16 defined terms, which are divisive concepts, and then it prohibits higher education institutions from discriminating against students and employees for failing to endorse or support these specific conducts, and it also prohibits their use in certain training. What we have been doing in terms of implementing this is we have had discussions with a number of different sub-councils and groups that have had questions about it, because predictably, many of our faculty have questions about it. I think it's fair to say that overall, when we actually sit down and talk with the faculty, and we've done this for different sub-councils as well as different institutions, they recognize that what is in the media has not always been accurate. For example, what the media did, and I'm not trying to disparage anything in the media, but the media covered several bills that did not make it into law, and that is just stuck in the minds of people. And then the media has not always listed the 16 divisive concepts, so there's some question about whether, if I say anything controversial or divisive, am I going to get in trouble? So the feedback that we've gotten is, after we explain specifically what is in this legislation, and we will be doing it over, we will be hitting it again as the fall ramps up, probably in August, is that it seems to be putting faculty minds at ease and some administrative minds at ease that it is not as much of an issue as they thought it might be. So again, I'll pause there, Vice Chair Reynolds, and see if there are any questions about that.
Anything else for Brian? Okay. Let's keep going.
All right, and strategic advancement. As you all know, SOAR 22 was a very huge success, and again, congratulations to all of those winners. We will be doing a full advancement report to date at the June meeting, and our foundation finance chair, Eric Klenite, will be doing that presentation. So we really look forward to having him in June. And then the final college advancement reports will be presented to the quarterly board meeting in December. And as we move on to marketing and digital strategy, that team continues to serve the system whole. The department has constant projects and advertisement requests from TBR departments and institutions across our state. And a full report will be given in June for the campaign that is upcoming for the summer. And finally, with campus safety and security, we will discuss our newest addition in external affairs, the Department of Campus Safety and Security, Chief Mike Williams. He is our new Assistant Vice Chancellor for Campus Safety and Security and TCAT Chief of Police. So he has a huge job for our system. He has been active since May, and he really hit the ground running. We're excited to have such an experienced law enforcement officer leading our opportunities at the system and for the colleges. He will have much on his shoulders because he has a twofold mission, really. He serves as a system office advocate and resource for our existing community college departments, but he also will be building and leading the statewide police department for the TCAPs. So he will be visiting campuses soon. That the schedules are underway or being planned right now. He's assessing everything, looking at the Homeland Security reports that have previously been done. So at the June meeting, we will have him present to date what he has done and what he has accomplished, which I can tell you all is going to be quite a bit. And Vice Chair, that concludes our report unless there are any questions.
Any questions or comments for Vice Chancellor McCormick? Lots to look forward to here in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
And the chief will be with us, right, at
yes, he
at
will.
the June meeting? Excellent. Good. Well, I look forward to meeting him. Hearing no other questions, Brian, we are coming back to you and to April Preston, who does such an able job heading HR for us, with some more proposed policy revisions.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Reynolds. And I believe the PowerPoints will be coming up. So we've got a few policy updates in the personnel matter, and I'll take the lead on the first, I think, 4 of them, and then April will follow up with the final one. The first one that we revised is the alternate work arrangements policy, which used to be called the remote work policy. Generally, what we did is we took the lessons learned over the past 2 years and tried to put some of them into policy and otherwise update some things. So the general strategic view is that the first part of the policy is applicable to all forms of alternate work, not just remote work, such as modified work weeks, potentially job sharing, and some of the others. But by far the most significant revisions to the policy regard remote work. And what we've also included to make clear is that there is a general expectation that employees will have a central or primary workplace in the state of Tennessee. There is flexibility for presidents and HR to approve exceptions to have people working out of state, but we thought it was important to make sure that this is an expectation that people will generally be in Tennessee that if there's going to be an exception, it needs to be for a good reason. That relates in part because our name is the Tennessee Board of Regents, but it also relates to some of the issues related, legal issues, regulatory issues, and other issues related to out-of-state work that we just needed to get our hands around it before things got out of control. The Chancellor must approve any international work because, again, the regulatory and other issues related to hiring somebody who is going to be based in another country are even greater than somebody working out of state. So then we've identified that there are potential tax consequences to working out of state, and we've made it clear for employees, and again, tried to put in policy so that that is something that needs to be done. And then there are a number of other smaller changes, just clarifying the approval process, that remote work is not available for everybody. It's more suitable for certain jobs than other jobs. And it also provides that certain aspects are not applicable to faculty, and it clarifies that. So I'll pause there in case anybody has any questions on that.
Think we can keep going.
All right, then the next slide, please, Kara. The next two policies are really something that we would like to consider in tandem, which is that faculty compensation during summer session, as well as the outside employment compensation and extra compensation policy. These are really two separate policies historically, and because the first one deals primarily with faculty and continue to deal with faculty, and the second one deals with all employees, we've decided not to try to merge them, but rather to make sure that there's not really daylight between them and that they are read consistently. The goal is to reflect current pay practices, so it's not really changing anything, but what it really does, and the primary impetus behind causing the revisions to the policy, is to clarify pay during some of these new terms that we've got. Maymester is not necessarily a new term, but wintermester in between the fall and the spring, there is some question of how is that paid? So what we've essentially done is to say that any summer session and any Maymester session for faculty when they teach are paid at the 132nd rate. What that is that for each credit hour that they teach, they receive 1/32 of their regular academic year salary. There was some confusion about that. And there's also a desire among the community college presidents to bring consistency to how the different community colleges did that. Anything that is not paid at the summer session rate would then be paid at an overload rate, which is for the community colleges established by guideline. So again, bringing some consistency to that, but providing a little bit more flexibility to the TCATs, recognizing that the TCATs have different areas in there. So again, this is something that's been vetted by the faculty and has been heavily discussed, or at least provided, and it seemed to be approved. So again, I'll pause there in case there are any other questions. Well, thank you, Carol, for pointing out that I needed to make a couple of other points. Part of the outside employment policy also clarifies that there is no need to approve outside employment for part-time employees. It is just generally expected that part-time employees will have other employment. Part-time employees, however, do need to continue to comply with the conflict of interest policy, as must all employees. So there are procedures included in there to approve the process of outside employment, both for existing employees and for new employees, with the goal of making sure that if you're a part-time employee coming on board or a full-time employee coming on board and you want to continue what you're doing, then you have to get it approved in advance to avoid any kind of unpleasant surprises. So again, just kind of modernizing, updating that, and trying to make some improvements to that. So with there, Vice Chair Reynolds, I'll pause to see if you or anybody else has questions.
I think everybody's absorbed it, so let's keep going.
Okay. Then the final policy that I will discuss before turning it over to April relates to commissioning of police and security officers. This is something that Chief Williams has identified as a way to improve the policy and to clarify that the board has authorized a TBR system office police force. The current policy talks about institutional police forces applying only to the community colleges and TCATs. Doesn't apply to specifically apply to the system office. Of course, the Post Commission has essentially approved the TBR system office. So and the board has previously approved funding for the TBR system office that will include the TCATs. So Chief Williams pointed out it would probably be good if policy is consistent with that. So that is the major change on this. And we've also changed the name to more current, to better reflect the scope of the policy. It's not just commissioning of security officers, it's commissioning, more importantly, of police officers. And that's, so again, very minor changes, but just to clarify and make certain that the board has approved a police force that can cover the system office as well. So I'll pause again, Vice Chair Reynolds.
No, just appreciate the consistency on this. So this is good.
And if there are no questions,
yeah,
nothing else.
April is up next. Hey, Brian, I do have one quick question of you and of April. I don't think she's on yet, but you all have reviewed all of these with Regent Green as personnel chair?
Yeah, I'm not, no, I don't think we have. I don't know what I don't know that we have.
Okay. Okay. Might be good just to get her on a quick call.
We'll do.
That would, since these will be on consent agenda, presumably, right?
Yes.
Okay. That would be great. Just reach out to her and see if she'd like to do a deeper dive.
Will do.
Emily, I'm on the line, Emily.
Oh, there you are. Okay, good.
Yeah,
so you're good to go. Or do you need any more on this, Chairman Green?
I don't think so. I'll review it one more time and just go through those slides again and then catch up with him if needed.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, April.
Thank you. I wanted to go over a few proposed revisions to our sick leave policy. The state implemented a policy effective July 2021. And while TBR doesn't have to follow those sick leave policy revisions that the state implemented, the TBR sub-councils agreed that it would be good to take a look at it and propose the following revisions. Specifically, the revisions are for an individual who is identified as a special disabled veteran. And to be a special disabled veteran, they must be 30% or more disabled, specifically due to a service-related injury they received while serving our country. The revisions to the policy provide up to 36 hours of sick leave that is specific to them, not a family member who becomes sick. They have to use it for their own use. Generally, the rule of thumb would be that it would be for medical appointments. However, if they needed it for other things that sick leave is eligible for, they would be able to use it for that as well. The sick leave doesn't accumulate each year, but it starts anew each year. Specifically, it would have no cash value to the individual. So the person would identify as a specially disabled veteran upon hire or upon return to work if they were medically discharged. The Human Resource Office at each of the campuses could ask for documentation to support this and to support the use of the additional leave. And again, the purpose of the leave is specifically for the individual's medical appointments. Are there any questions?
Hearing none, let's assume everybody understands the changes coming. Anything else, Brian and April, that covers the ground for us here?
Nothing from my perspective, Vice Chair Reynolds.
Okay.
Or mine.
Excellent.
Or mine.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. I know these policies, they're living documents, right? So there's always something moving, changing to clean up, and we appreciate this level of detail. Dr. Blackwood, I see your smiling face there. You're going to talk to us a little bit this morning about competency-based education and what we're up to.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair Reynolds, Chancellor Titans, and committee chairs. One of the key goals for academic affairs is to develop competency-based education programs, referred to as CBE, that enhance existing program offerings and meet the needs of adult learners and employers. CBE is an innovative, student-centric approach to learning that promotes open access and improves opportunities by removing barriers for learners. It is designed for equitable student achievement by mastering clearly defined real-world competencies based on workforce needs. Students are able to learn at their own pace and minimize the time from enrollment to employment. You are already familiar with this approach to learning, as our TCAP programs are competency-based, and the goal is to expand Cbe programs across community colleges. You may recall that in 2021-22, the board supported the allocation of $750,000 for CBE development. $400,000 of that was recurring funds, which were allocated for 3 positions for CBE curriculum coordinators, and $350,000 was non-recurring funds to support the initial CBE course and program development through faculty grants. Initially, those faculty grants were focused on supporting 3 to 4 community colleges to develop CBE programs and launch them the following year. To meet these goals, Academic Affairs established a team of CBE curriculum coordinators who have partnered with community colleges to provide training, resources, and support to impact their students. We have already exceeded the initial goals of 3 to 4 colleges, as now all 13 community colleges are engaged in this work at varying levels. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chuck Lopez, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, who is leading a dynamic team to refine the CBE landscape for TBR colleges, and he will provide an update. Dr. Lopez?
Thank you, Vice Chair Blackwood. Good morning, Madam Vice Chair, Chancellor Tidings, and members of the Chair Committee. I would like to echo the remarks Dr. Blackwood has made about competency-based education. We have seen this type of teaching method in our government, including our military and sports. And of course, many of our TCATS programs utilize this type of learning. It's the difference between reading how to play football and talking about how to play football versus suiting up and getting on the field. Next slide, please. So as we look at the national landscape, the American Institute of Research provided the following data for us. 82% of the respondents said they expect competency-based education to grow nationally. Where 28% of the respondents were at 2-year institutions, Tennessee institutions have an opportunity to get into the market. It's truly an innovative, cutting edge, and wide open initiative. Next slide, please. So I think we all can agree, we learn a lot when we ask our students their perspectives on an initiative. Here are some key findings in a qualitative research project sponsored by the Lumina and Gates Foundation. Flexibility is the hallmark benefit to CBE students. The participants highly value the ability to study when they want to and progress at their own pace. Competency-based education works best for self-motivated learners who prefer setting up their own schedule. The best support programs offered in a competency-based program includes a mix of social and academic help. CBE students have a lot more confidence in their career preparation than traditional students, although programs may struggle to teach soft skills. So one student said, "I like how it's on your own time. It's flexible, and I like how it's all project-based. And another student says, learning style and motivation are key. Motivation is the most important thing. You have to be driven and you have to have goals, but the faculty are there to help us in achieving the goals. And a third student said, my favorite part is definitely the projects, the actual work. It's different than being in an actual college class. It's more real world based. I feel like I'm actually learning things that will help me in life in general. So next slide. From an institutional perspective, a separate research project was supported by the American Institution on Research, investigating, and their investigation really looked at established programs. And they found adult learners make up 68 to 90% of the CBE program populations. Students with prior experience make up 70%. Many of the institutions saw an increase in their completion rates between 2 and 10%, as well as retention rates were up 15% or higher with comparative groups. They also found the average pace of a student in a CBE program could be up 42% more per unit per term than a comparative institution. Next slide. Building a CBE program starts with identifying the workforce needs and curriculums. So as Dr. Blackwood mentioned, the state provided TBR with some one-time funding to use to incentivize the redesign and development of competency-based education. And again, our goal was to really support 3 to 4 colleges submitting this through this grant process. We're excited to report that 7 institutions were identified as early adopters. Next slide, please. So 100% of the community colleges are participating in this initiative. 46% are in the planning phase, meaning they're serving on the CBE leadership board, they're developing goals and developing timelines to move their initiative forward. And 54% are in the development stage, meaning they're actively creating courses, they're attending faculty trainings, they have an action plan and timelines to launch their program in the next 2 semesters. And then 8% of the institutions are considered active, meaning they have SACS COC approval, they have fully developed courses and are actively enrolled, and they are actively enrolling students. So these are truly our CBE champions. Next slide. So TBR has partnered with CBEN, which is the Competency-Based Education Network. It's a national organization that delivers training to faculty and administrators at the campus and statewide level. CBEN literally wrote the book on implementing this type of initiative at a system level and an institutional level. They've provided similar types of training for Kentucky, Illinois, Connecticut, and Colorado. Participants in the training attend 9 sessions, and faculty participants have homework and an expectation to build out their students' competencies and create different forms of assessment. Next slide, please. So we have 7 colleges identified as the early adopters. They're creating 8 programs in hospitality and tourism, supply chain logistics, cyber defense, public safety, substance abuse counseling, cardiovascular technology, and learning support. We have faculty attending workshops and are from early adopting institutions, and we're developing 64 courses that could potentially be shared across the state. Next slide, please. As we focus on the future, we want to identify ways that we can maximize the reach for CBE. First, the CBE has been working on a special project we call the General Education Project. The idea is that TBR will work with faculty to provide a library of general education courses that colleges can use in their own CBE program. So that they can then focus on program-specific courses. We've identified 33 general education courses that are most commonly found across all curriculums and in all colleges. We've partnered with TBR to explore opportunities to redesign current content in the CBE format. So we're really excited about that program. Additionally, we have an ambassador program working this summer where faculty from the 13 community colleges are doing a needs assessment, identifying current CBE activities, looking for CBE program development, and developing a plan for the next 12 to 18 months. Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that our faculty feel completely supported. So in addition to the staff that Dr. Blackwood has spoken about, we've also created a resource page on our website, and we have developed a course in our learning management system designed to help faculty in developing CBE. Next slide, please. So we're excited about how we can provide our students with more flexible learning environment. So I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone has on this project.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Any comments or questions on this good work? I do have one question. As we continue to develop this and roll it out, to whom do we specifically market this? Is it targeted at adult learners as we look at our student base? Is it geared to everybody? But is there a marketing plan behind this, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Sure, the marketing plan definitely would focus on adult learners, but really the idea is it's a much more hands-on approach. So there's an opportunity to market it to incoming traditional age freshmen as well, especially as we look at the hands-on approach. The key is that it's self-paced and it's goal-driven by the student.
And are the TCATs potentially part of this market as we move forward? I think it's great all the community colleges are in this, but is this strictly a community college effort?
Well, there's always an opportunity for the TCATs to be involved. Actually, many of their programs are already designed as competency-based models where they're looking at their knowledge, skills, and abilities and being evaluated. This particular model is more online, so there's always an opportunity to bring the TCATs in this space as well.
Okay, just curious.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Sorry. No, it's so interesting.
Chairwoman, this is Nisha. I've got a quick couple of questions just on the funding. So it sounds to me like this is coming from the Gates Foundation. It's kind of new to me, so if I've got something wrong, let me know. Series of a couple of questions. One, what level of funding are we at on this? I don't have a handle on that. And also, is the funding through the entire process, or do you have to submit annually for some level of funding to get you through a certain program completion? And is there some kind of a measurement that they are using to evaluate this process? And then this data that you've provided, who's that coming from? What's the source? So that's a lot of questions, but I think you can kind of explain it.
Sure. So let me start with the data piece. So the data that I'm providing for you is national data coming from the grant, many different sources. So the Gates Foundation and the Lumina Foundation are the sources for the national data on research across numerous states and numerous programs and projects. So our specific revenue source is actually coming from the state and is not tied to any grant funding. So we receive $400,000 for our competency-based education curriculum coordinators and managing funds, and then the initial one-time funding of $350,000 for incentivizing our faculty to make those changes. So the metrics we're using will be the number of courses and programs that we're developing to move the full program forward, and how we can share those courses with our partners across the state. So Dr. Blackwood or Dr. Dean, if you'll have any comments to add to that.
I think that captured it. I would just highlight that one-time funding, the ideas that the colleges have been engaged in this training and development of CBE. So then they will have those practices, how to then duplicate it across other programs. And really that recurring funding is to ensure that those CBE curriculum specialists are always available to support the scaling up across the community colleges, even beyond this initial allocation. Thank you, Dr. Lopez.
Thank you.
And what was the comment that you made about the funding, that it doesn't come from the foundations, but that it comes from the state? I may have misunderstood.
Yeah,
Sure,
Nisha, I'll jump in if you like. That is a special allocation that we received from the state. We presented that to THEC as one of our special initiatives 2 years ago, and it was funded through that special initiative. We also knew that we had the Lumina and the Gates grant that we were, again, focusing on this area. So we were able to take all of those dollars and put that into this very important initiative. But the state, the reoccurring dollars are from the state, and the one-time money was from the state.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thanks to you both for this, and I trust you will keep us all posted as we hit other milestones.
Yes, we'll certainly bring a report as we get to another significant point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I would just like to lean in on this too, and to thank both Chuck and Jothany for the great work that's being done on this. This has been an amazing lift, and they have done a great job on getting this out to the colleges. And if you remember back from Chuck's chart, we now have 100% of the colleges engaged in this activity at some level. That was our goal, was to get everybody on board with this. And so I'm just really pleased to say that 2 years out, we're there. We've got more work to do, but they are all engaged in the activities at this point, and it is going to make a tremendous difference in our retention and graduation numbers for students. This is some exciting work that's been going on in the system. So thanks to both of you and to our curriculum developers for the great job that they've been doing.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you.
Great perspective. We'll look forward to hearing more, but in the meantime, keep up the good work. Much appreciated. Our Executive Vice Chancellor, Russ Deaton, wants to talk to us about some potential changes in service areas for two of our community colleges. We don't do this very often, right? And I gather this is an action that we'll take under new business when we gather here in a couple of weeks. But Russ, could you fill us in, please?
Happy to. And good morning, Vice Chair Reynolds and Dr. Tidings and members of the board. As noted, this is a bit of an unusual item, and it's on the full agenda here in a few weeks, which is some proposed changes to two of our college's service areas. And go to the next slide, please, Carol. And I'm going to provide some background here, but importantly, you're going to hear directly from the two presidents, Dr. George Pimentel at Jackson and Dr. Scott Cook at Dyersburg, about the changes, about the rationale, and about how they're jointly approaching the responsibility here. But as background first, to remind the board, service areas essentially define the spheres of responsibility for our 13 community colleges. All 95 Tennessee counties are essentially assigned to one of the 13 community colleges. And this helps direct recruitment efforts, marketing efforts. It helps guide where relationships are established with industry and K-12 partners and others. But essentially, it helps sort of create some boundaries for how colleges serve particular areas across the state. These are not established in statute. Important to note that these are established by this body, by the board, without any sort of definition or mandate from statute. And as Vice Chair Reynolds noted, the last one of these we made was within the last decade or so, clarifying Davidson County and the Vol State National State relationship. Go ahead, please, Carol. So these are important to TBR as we analyze student enrollment patterns. And let me say, too, nothing in the service areas restrict or mandate where a student goes to college. These are, of course, very fluid. So it defines the college's responsibility, does not dictate to a student where he or she attends. But we monitor these patterns pretty well. Those of you who are familiar with our college profiles on the website, you'll note that each college, we show a map with enrollment from the surrounding counties, both in their service area and some outside their service area. So we're constantly watching where enrollments are naturally occurring, where the de facto service areas are evolving over time. And for some of our colleges, these are much simpler. If you can imagine the Southwest Community College service area, which consists of Shelby and Fayette, is a little more dense and more urban for the most part, whereas, say, the Jackson State service area is 14 counties throughout West Tennessee, a little more complex analysis because you've got a much more dispersed student enrollment population there. But to then set up Dr. Cook and Dr. Pimentel, both leadership from both colleges expressed mutual interest in making some adjustments to their respective service areas, essentially to modernize them. So over the course of really the past year or so, we've had extensive discussions with leadership from both campuses about the rationale, about how they would approach the task, about the timeline, particularly about communications, which are critical to these changes. Were they to be approved, how we communicate this change with partners across K-12, across industry, et cetera. And so all that brings us to the point today. My last slide before I turn to Dr. Pimentel and Dr. Cook. Carol, if you can go to the next one, please. Just to show you what the current service areas are. A legend would have cluttered up the slide too much, and so I hope the colors are self-explanatory about which college it is. But you can see, again, these are geographically contiguous. They are, for the most part, quite tight and focused around the proximate college. And again, durable over time with some very minor changes over time before the one we bring to you today. We'll have some subsequent maps you'll see in the presentation here later on, which show you which counties we propose to change and how the new service areas would look. But as of now, these are the existing service areas for Tennessee's 95 counties. So with that, let me first pause. Are there any questions about the background of service areas or why we have them or anything before I turn to Drs. Pimentel and Cook to go through the meat of the presentation here? Seeing none, Dr. Pimentel, I will turn to you to take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Deaton. Good morning, everyone. We, as everybody knows, we are facing a tremendous growth in West Tennessee with the announcement of Blue Oval City, and those 6,000 plus jobs are going to be coming. It's the other second and third tier level corporations and businesses and companies that are going to be coming to our area, and they're going to be located all throughout West Tennessee. Those are going to be the suppliers for Ford, essentially. And it's going to make it incredibly difficult for any one college to meet the needs of all these companies. In fact, the last figure I heard was some additional 57,000 workers will be needed just to complete all the second and third level tier companies and businesses that will be required, and just the normal growth with what that comes with. And so we thought it might be a great time to look at how we could better serve our students by making the service areas a little bit more balanced. As you can see that this map right now, with the 14 county service area that Jackson State has, it is going to be difficult if every one of those counties has a new business for us to meet the needs of that company alone. And so this is what we propose. Next slide, please. The slide really just indicates that Crockett and Haywood would go to Dyersburg along with Weakley and Henry. Dyersburg already has some sites and a shared site with UT Martin that is closer to Weakley and Henry counties than Jackson State's main campus. So with the changes proposed here, it does allow both Dyersburg and Jackson State to meet the needs of our students, and of course our the information we're going to need to provide all the possible employers coming to these areas. The only true switch is that currently Dyersburg has a campus in Gibson County in the city of Trenton, which is already our county. They will be giving that to Jackson State, and we have a small campus in Henry County in Paris that will go to Dyersburg. Dr. Cook, would you like to add additional information?
Certainly. Thank you, Dr. Pimentel. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I would just like to echo Dr. Pimentel's sentiments that this really does provide better balance for West Tennessee. And from my perspective, this change is all about providing the very best service that we can to the counties in our respective service areas. You know, 5 counties is a challenge, just like 14 counties is a significant challenge. So I do believe that this is in the best interest of not only both institutions, but also the citizens of West Tennessee.
Next slide, please. So with that, now you can see an overview of the changes that we are proposing. Are there any questions about this so far?
I do have a question. Have we done, I'm not at all opposed to this, let me say, and I applaud you guys working so closely together on this. Have we vetted this yet or talked to local officials, other stakeholders? You're both so close to the ground and in these communities. Are you waiting for us to take action before those conversations occur? I'm just curious how this timeline lines up.
The timeline starts today. We wanted to present to the chairs first, and then Dr. Cook and I will be together for a lot of today, going meeting with legislators, meeting with our campuses, you know, doing that work and sending out a joint statement later on this evening. And so everything starts today, and then we will be notifying people going forward.
And how many, what's rough numbers, and we may not have these today, if I'm at Dyersburg State now and Gibson County, well, that's not a good example. If I'm with you now, Dr. Pimentel, in Weakley County, and now I'm going into Dyersburg State service territory, it doesn't necessarily apply to me today, I understand, but what potential number shifts are there for you guys in terms of enrollments?
Well, there may be some shifts, especially in the dual enrollment area to Dyersburg. But overall, and Dr. Deaton had put together some great analysis about students in all of our areas go to different colleges regardless. And so each of us pick up, there's going to be some students in Hayward County that would come to Jackson State regardless of the change because of a program, and vice versa. And so what we saw when we were reviewing the data was that there's pretty fluid going back and forth between Dyersburg and Jackson State throughout the area. So we don't think at this point it's going to be a major shifting of a lot of enrollment other than maybe in dual enrollment. But that would be the only area that responsibilities would change.
Dr. Pimentel, you said that perfectly. What we know, and as all of you are aware, service area does not preclude any student from going to where they want to, and our students go all over the state. The primary reason is now that these colleges would be responsible for meeting with the superintendents and the principals in those areas to promote more. Service area really implies that that's their area to go in and do promotion. So we know that over a course of time, if they are the college and they're promoting, there'll be some shift because that'll be the college that people will be seeing. But also, as Dr. Pimentel referenced earlier, we know that we're going to have a lot of business changes going on in this area. And so the ones that they represent, they will be responsible for making sure any industry in that area is served at an appropriate level. So probably not a lot of shift in the first year or two. I think we will see that as gradual over time.
Okay. No, it's good to look forward. So others with questions or comments, particularly our West Tennessee regents?
Well, I have a comment. I think looking at the service area is great and something that we should be doing periodically. I guess my comment is, to the extent that we, in my opinion, could have obtained what I'll refer to as buy-in from some of the stakeholders before we are asked to make a decision, the better off we would be as a board, because I'm quite sure all of you have heard the term or expression, all politics is local, and I just don't want us to approve something without having gotten some feedback from some of those who will potentially be affected, even if it's just the perception of an effect.
And Regent Duckett, that's a great point. And that was kind of why when Dr. Pimentel, it starts today, we're trying to get as much in as we can between now and the time you will actually be asked to vote on this. But we always feel like we're a chicken and an egg. We don't want to do anything that our board is not aware that we're out there talking about. So today was the important piece, to make sure the board was aware that these conversations would begin and that they'll be having them. And as he said, legislators, local mayors, superintendents, these are the people they have scheduled already to get out there and talk to. So when we come back on the 16th and 17th, we will have more feedback on what community members are saying.
Okay, thank you.
Chairwoman, this is Nisha Powers. Just quickly, I completely support the comments that Greg Duckett just made, and that was my initial instinct and concern, is that it seems kind of top down versus sort of a more collaborative initiative where everyone sort of understands what's going on. And I had a little bit of a challenge just grasping how and why we were doing this until somebody said something clarifying, like, hey, this is about the folks that are having to go and talk to schools and whatnot and bring them into the fold, and this makes it easier. So it's almost a messaging issue as well when you're talking to local folks, I think, and it's really important that we do that in a way that feels like we are not rushing to a board meeting in 2 weeks, but that it does have proper, genuine engagement from the local folks that it affects, and that they don't feel like it's just a box to be checked, and they feel like they're being sought for feedback and that they're part of the process. Thank you.
That is great feedback from you both. Thank you. Chancellor, anything else? Or Dr. Pimentel, I'm sorry.
There's just a couple more slides I'll go through briefly and then open it up for questions again. These are just some data points. And 6% of first-time freshmen, recent high school graduates from Jackson service area enroll at Dyersburg in 2021. The information on the counties there, highest number of enrollment who enroll in colleges outside the county service areas. And that just goes to the point of that students, it may be closer to them to go to Dyersburg or to one of their off-campus sites than to us, and vice versa. So that's just something that happens throughout our service areas. The timeline would be, if approved, we would use this 2022-2023 to transition personnel, activities, meet all the SACS requirements that will have to be which would have to be completed, especially from the site in Trenton and the one in Paris. And the proposed effective date would be July 1, 2023. We do expect today, like I said earlier, that we are meeting with several groups of people. We will find out, I think, relatively quickly how they feel about these changes. And Dr. Cook and I plan to do a road tour where we both go to see a variety of these mayors, superintendents, others, to explain the changes and to really just say that with the changes happening in West Tennessee, it's not Dyersburg and Jackson State are not in competition with each other. We are together to help serve our students, and especially the business and industry that's coming. It's going to take us both to be able to do what's necessary in the next few years to make sure our students are ready for employment. And that's really the message I want to leave everyone with. I know, having gone through the Ball State, Nashville State move as well, that people get very attached to their local community college. But we want to just make sure we assure them that we're doing this together, and we are doing this to make it a better educational experience for everyone. Dr. Cook, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you very much. I think you did an excellent job, Dr. Pimentel. I just will reiterate that, from my perspective, this really is not about abandoning any county, any area, but it is all about providing the very best TBR experience that we can on this side of the state.
Chancellor, one quick question for you. If our presidents come back and say they need more time and meetings and socializing this with the communities, given this timeline, do we need to take an action on June 16 or 17, or if we need to wait until September, is that at all an option?
We can certainly wait if we need to. If they start getting feedback that is of a negative sort, then we certainly can. And I'm really not anticipating a lot of negative, because we have done a little bit of feeling out there to see. And again, what I think most people want to hear is the level of service they're going to be receiving. Again, it as I've said to the students, they can still go wherever they want to go to get whichever program they want to receive. Business and industry, there have been a couple that I've had some conversations with that that they thought this was sound logic and down the road. So I could be wrong, and if we get a lot of negative feedback, then we certainly will want to regroup. But again, we felt like it was important that the board bless us going out and having the conversations before we move any further.
No, and I think the bottom line is, as I said, everybody's trying to look forward and anticipate, based on this unique opportunity for West Tennessee. And I have every confidence that Drs. Pimentel and Cook are working closely together on this, right? So this and this any change is going to be seamless. But I do think, kind of based on Regents Duckett's and Powers' comments, kind of keeping that ear to the ground, because 2 weeks isn't a very long time, would be really helpful for us as a board before any action is taken. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, or please feel free to disagree with me if I'm not expressing how anybody's feeling.
I appreciate you supporting not having a set date. It's not arbitrary in our minds, but it might be to other people, and so I appreciate you making that comment and that suggestion, Chair Lady.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just think it's an excellent suggestion that make sure we have all the proper input from the government folks and school folks over there.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
And I just want to say, I assume we're going to find out quickly today how people feel about it. And we, of course, will relay that constantly to TBR and the Chancellor.
Emily, this is Joey. And before I comment, I want to say that I'm present and yes to both questions.
Very good. We have you well trained.
That's right. So understand some of the concern, and I'll tell you that I witnessed this while I was on the Nashville State Foundation Board several years back, before I was on the Board of Regents, and kind of the battle lines between Vol State and Nashville State and who owned the territory. And so those things occur. And I know the smart people on this call know that. So there is a little bit of pushback and questioning when you start moving the lines that people have gotten used to for so long. So I think it's wise to think that maybe we do need to push that vote out further, because I think there'll be more conversation about that than, you know, what's real, the appearance that we're actually telling people they got to go to a different place because that's what the Board of Regents is going to decide. That's an interesting dynamic.
Well said. Anyone else? Well, gentlemen, good luck in this journey. Russ, do you have anything else to add on this?
I do not, no, ma'am.
Okay. If it is helpful at all in your messaging, I think it is fair to say, and Chancellor, correct me if you think differently, but obviously the board has been briefed on this. We are anxious to hear from our communities about this before any formal action is taken, that we understand the need, but we certainly want to make sure our communities are on board. Is that fair? All right. Anything else, you guys, on this important topic?
No, ma'am.
All right. Thank you all very much. Good discussion. Thank you. And now, moving on perhaps to more discussion. And Chancellor, I don't know if you want to set this up for Russ or if you want to go straight to him.
I will only set it up to say this is something that I'm extremely excited about, something that we've been working on, and just really happy and excited to present this to you today. So Dr. Deaton, I will turn it over to you to explain the reimagining.
Happy to. Well, thank you, Dr. Tidings. Well, this is a bit of an unusual item, but it's very much a forward-looking item. And that was part of the reason why we also sent this concept paper out to board members, calling it out to be able to consume it ahead of time, to kind of reckon and wrestle with its concepts, to then be able to talk about today. And the goal today is to engage in that discussion, to hear from members about whether this is indeed a concept that's worth CBR thinking about, whether it is consonant with our mission, and whether it's indeed something that's worthy of some deeper consideration. Next slide, please, Carol. And at its heart, it seeks to and envisions a world where we have dramatically higher retention and graduation rates, where we have dramatically larger numbers of graduates, students who are both moving into programs that connect them with a meaningful career and that then connect to the contemporary economy, where the economy is going. And in doing so, the concept paper really tries to, I think, directly look into the eye of several key strategic facts, one of which is the very urgent need for a more effective alignment between workforce needs and academic programs. That's a notion that all of our colleges spend a lot of time thinking about now, no doubt. But if anything, the last few years have, I think, taught us all that that need is more urgent than ever. And the concept paper attempts to strengthen that need and to shine a brighter light on the necessity of that. But the paper also tries to take a very honest reckoning of where we stand currently, the reality of our access, retention, and success metrics, and in particular how the last 2.5 years of the pandemic have affected those. This board was one of the first ones to see the impact of community college enrollment declines in fall of 2020, and have subsequently seen those reports every board meeting since about a cumulative 15% decline in enrollment. Just last week, we saw the state's college going rate numbers drop below promise levels. all this too has been in the context of an economic environment where you have inflation at 40-year record levels, you have wage spirals that are occurring in several industries, and the stark reality is such where the wage premium calculus for many of our students has changed. Before the last few years, the difference in a retail or hospitality job hourly wage and a career you could get via one of our programs was significant. Now, the reality is you can go to a Target or a food service and make $20, $25 an hour, and that changes students' decision calculus, and therefore it ought to change our calculus and our approach. So the concept paper tries to take a very honest reaction to both of those broad dynamics. Next slide, please, Carol. But all this, though, starts from a very firm foundation that I hope this board feels comfortable with, which is that our community colleges currently are producing record number of credentials. We have responded to the call of the last several governors in meeting our educational attainment goals. We've doubled graduation rates. And Tennessee and our TBR colleges for years have been leading innovators in some very key spaces. TBR ought to keep building off of these reforms. None of that goes away. The concept paper envisions this would be occurring alongside those existing reforms. Next slide, please, Carol. However, it's also the case that we do continue to have success challenges. As this board knows, 1/4 of each freshman class does not return for their spring semester. Another 1/4 of that freshman class doesn't return for their second year. This is what produces that about 50% retention rate, which we're all familiar with. Many of those students leave us with 0 credit hours. They have not accumulated any progress towards a credential, some with debts, all of them with a bit of a murky future. We have significant equity gaps, which of course the Achieving the Dream work and strategic enrollment management work are trying to put a lot of resources into addressing. But even for students who are pursuing the associates for transfer and want a bachelor's degree, we still see a tough road ahead. Only about 1 out of every 7 of our freshmen ever earn that bachelor's degree. Most of them are in that transfer pathway, but never make it to where they eventually want to get to. And all of that is leavened with an honest look at the labor market analysis, which really shines a light on the fact that if you have a student with an Associate of Arts or Associate of Science who intends to transfer, but who does not transfer and complete that bachelor's degree, the labor market has begun to not value that as much as it has in the past. And most of our students are on that pathway. Now, it is no doubt that wage analyses are not the only way to measure success and not the only yardstick we should have to measure ourselves. But it is an important one, and it is one where students, as they are pursuing whatever life holds for them, having a job, having a career that pays well is a prerequisite for many of those life choices later on. So it's a crucial benchmark to use. Go ahead, please, Carol. So with that, again, the key concept, the key dynamic the paper is trying to wrestle with is this necessity of the alignment. COVID-19, and again, all those economic trends we've discussed have just sharpened that imperative for higher ed to offer credentials of greater value to students, to connect to the needs of the economy. Much of the college going rate decline, you can theorize, is attached to this dynamic that students are not seeing that value proposition for the credential as much as they did just a few years ago. And meanwhile, voluminous reports, both from within Tennessee and nationwide, point to just the dramatic need for connecting and producing more of those middle skill credentials, those credentials that TBR produces. The labor dynamics are clear, whether it's state reports from ECD, labor and THEC, or national organizations. This is the terrain in which TBR must focus more energy on, because this is where the jobs are growing. This is where the economy is moving. This is what employers are clamoring for. Next slide, please, Carol. So in a nutshell, what the concept paper tries to convey is a reimagined student experience, which tries to then essentially resequence some common elements of what the higher education experience is now, but does so in a way that hopefully has not an incremental improvement in success, but hopefully a dramatic improvement in success. And what it starts out with is a much more extensive pre-college career exploration function, where students go through much more an in-depth analysis and discussions with advisors about where jobs are, what wages are, what their skill sets are, where their interests are. Again, colleges do this now, But I think the necessity of the moment indicates we have to dramatically ramp this up so that a student is prepared for the following, which would be a reimagined first semester experience. Right now, 3/4 of our students come into college, they're on the transfer pathway, and they take a variety of general education courses in that sequence, most of whom have co-requisite needs because of under preparation, and they're in learning support courses. This concept paper envisions a different starting point, which is that every student would then take some sort of workforce ready or workforce connected embedded certificate in that first year and first semester that's aligned with the local and regional economic needs that is identified by the college, that fits what the local economy needs, and that then hopefully then builds upon that into a second semester where you either add additional workforce ready skills or beginning to add contextualized general education courses. By contextualized, we simply mean that those courses would connect back to and reflect their sort of broad field of study. All of that would then hopefully meet a re-engineered transfer pathway sequence where all of this work stacks into whatever program the student wants to eventually pursue, whether it is the transfer credential, whether it's an Associate of Applied Science, or perhaps even a TCAP program. Next slide, please, Carol. And so finally, just to sum this up, just like now, every student can pursue whatever pathway, whatever credential he or she chooses, whether it's a certificate, transfer credential, whatever it is. But the concept paper says, but the first step on that journey perhaps ought to be a foundational workforce ready certificate so that more students are leaving college with a credential that prepares them for a career. And we have ample program examples of where that could be. This is not at all to be dictated or standardized. These are to reflect the local regional needs of the economy, all of which would then articulate into whatever pathway the student chooses. So that's the idea. The idea is that that first step on that journey, whatever the journey may be, ensures that they're having something of value that they can take into the workforce. And so hopefully many of those, of that half of our freshman class that never makes it past the first year, with this, hopefully many more of them would, if they were to leave college, have something to fall back on, but more importantly, hopefully prepares them for their eventual credential of an associate's degree, perhaps a bachelor's degree. Next slide, please, Carol. So at this point, Vice Chair Reynolds, I want to basically offer this up for discussion, and I have some questions that are just perhaps as prompts here, but I'm curious board members whether the ideas in that concept paper and as summarized here in the last few minutes, whether that resonates. And in particular, the second question is one that I think might be relevant. If we were designing the community college from the ground up today, would it have some of these features? Would it look more like what's described in the concept paper? And does this align well with TBR strategic plan? And what are the trade-offs associated with it? This concept paper is not trying to get into any implementation details at this juncture. It is indeed just that, a concept paper, but trying to think through how we design our future to better meet the needs of students and of our local economy and our communities. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Vice Chair Reynolds, for discussion.
Oh, thank you. As always, well done. But let's open it up for questions and comments from the board. Hopefully everybody has had a chance to read this thoughtful work at least one time through.
Hey, Vice Chair Reynolds, I'll weigh in.
Please.
Russ, great job. I really enjoyed reading this. I've had a couple of conversations with Dr. Jackson about, and I don't know if this is her vision or if she's just come to this conclusion or what, but some of the discussion we've had is that it's almost going further back than the step you're taking, that we're going to have to start taking people that are currently working. They're not going to go from high school to college. They're going to go from high school to a job. And then we're going to have to help propel them into the future, almost in an apprenticeship type mode. That was an interesting term she used because that was so popular 50 years ago. And, you know, other than the union areas, I'm not sure how popular that still is. And the other thing I'll comment on, I think to think that either the high school guidance counselors or the community college guidance counselors can deal with the sheer numbers is something that, you know, would be tough. But so I don't have the answer to some of those things, but I did like the thought that if we're taking employees and that defined career path is kind of there. I read with interest, I think in yesterday's Tennessean, about some of the training Nashville State's doing with some Vanderbilt employees of the medical center that are getting truck drivers and food service employees ready to be medical assistants. So, you know, that's pretty cool. That was only 11 people, but I do think we need to look at the role we could play with all the corporate entities in the state to, you know, maybe let that develop outside of before those high school students just arbitrarily say, yep, I'm going to this community college and this is what I'm going to study. Because I think those kids are getting further and further away from knowing that as they graduate from high school.
And can I give a different perspective, I guess, as maybe a parental perspective? I've got a kid that's in this 20-year-old, soon to be 21-year-old range, and his friends too, that have went the college route or the community college route and then have dropped in that freshman year because it's not for them, or they've just not known what they wanted to do. And having these options as certificates or other options of, you know, having more choices at the community college level, I think is very appealing. I think it would be exciting for them. I think there would be more that would even go that route, to know that they don't have to go just for a diploma, that they have other options and more options, and to market that as such. So as from the parental perspective, I can see where there is a huge, huge need for this, to come out with something and to come out with more. Because I've got that kid that's not in the box. I've got that kid that had the high ACT scores and we had high hopes at the university. That wasn't for him, and went the community college route. But Mom, I'm still not sure this is what I want to do. So we're working right now. And Mom is hoping we'll go back and find that niche. So you've got those kids we've got to grasp, and we've still got to give them things and hope they go back and get more. So they're out there and we got to get them, and we've got to figure out how to keep them and get them those certificates, if nothing else.
Yeah, this is Tom. I agree with what everyone said. And it seems to me, and first of all, I just want to say, Russ, your combination of logic and data never ceases to amaze me. It's always fun to hear your presentations. But I tell you, you know, it feels to me when you look at everything, it's like we've got in about 5 years, we're going to need another Tennessee Reconnect, because you got just so many, you know, kids coming out of high school, and it's easy to go get a $18 or $19 an hour job, and that's, you know, fine for a couple, 3 years, but that's not a lifetime.
And that's exactly what's happened. He's making what I made when I was in my 30s, just right out of college. He's like, man, why? Like, I'm making $18 an hour.
Yep.
Give me a reason.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I haven't. I did read through the document. I need to study a little bit more, you know, coming up for our meeting here in a couple of weeks. But, you know, I'm really behind what we're doing here, and I just think, you know, we're setting like I said, I think we're setting ourselves up for the need for another Tennessee Reconnect here in a few years.
Well, and kind of consistent with what Tom just said, Regent Gill could not be with us today, but he gave me a call late last week after he read the paper. And Russ, he was consistent with what Tom's words. He really appreciated not just taking a hard look at the data and doing the analysis, but taking an honest look at the data and thinking through next steps or possibilities. So he was very complimentary of this good work. He recognizes that this is a work in progress and much of this will evolve over time, but he gave me permission to share or to paraphrase his comments to you all today.
Well, thank you. As a parent, thank you all for looking at this and knowing that we need to do something.
What else, everybody? Russ, to question 2, if you were designing a community college from scratch, about the blueprint, I know you've talked to some folks from the outside, if you will, but are we aware of any other community college system doing something like this?
It's a good question, and a couple points. And I should have said this earlier. We've spoken extensively internally with our community college presidents, all of whom have seen earlier drafts of this, have obviously gotten this recent draft that the board got. And as Regent Hatch said, all presidents have weighed in on all sides of this. We've also, I guess, done some test laps, with some external folks to kind of get an external perspective on it. And to the question about do other states do something like this, in the aggregate, I think the short answer is no. There are states who have emulated or begin to move towards certain elements of this. And I should say, too, many of our colleges do certain of these things now. I think what is perhaps different here is the sequencing and the emphasis placed on different features throughout the student's experience that sort of fundamentally change it. No state's trying to do all of this. Some are trying to, for instance, focus much more on the career exploration so that students have much more greater intent and purpose to what they pursue in college. But the idea of shifting and resequencing the Gen Ed versus the more workforce ready courses, to our knowledge, at least, no one has tried that at any sort of scale that would be a model now.
Russ, this is Yolanda. Can you hear me?
Yes.
What's the feedback that we get from industry, given Wanda's response is that these kids are going to work? I mean, I think just in the banking industry, Bank of America just announced a $22 minimum. So that means as a teller, you can make nearly $50,000, which is incredible. But I would love to hear what industries are saying, because I gather that if those kids are not going to school or going to a TCAT or community college, that they're just going to train them and just try to keep them engaged and train them there. So love to hear your thoughts if we've engaged industry to get their guidelines.
We haven't directly yet. Wanted to first, of course, talk to this board about it. In intuiting what industry would probably say based on the voluminous reports we see about the economic needs for greater middle skill credentials and based on where wages and inflation have been going lately, I think they would see in the short term, they feel like they're getting what they need. Now, long term, are they? I would be curious because, like you said, the recent high school graduate who goes to become a bank teller, will that work for them 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? I think that's both industry's challenge and, frankly, our challenge to convey to students that there's still some long-term thinking, hopefully, that we can convey where they do need to find a way to come back to higher education. This is also where what Dr. Jackson and others have discussed resonates because many of our presidents are thinking about the nexus between the for-credit opportunities and the non-credit side of the house, the workforce training side of the house, so that bank teller, for instance, doesn't have to quit her job to come back to school. There's a way to meld that experience with much more entry and exit ramps, as they say, between higher education and the workforce. So I think obviously all this has changed the last 2 or 3 years, but I think in the main, both industry and students would find this would be appealing as a long-term strategy.
And Yolanda, one of the things that we've seen with business and industry, and which accounts for some of our non-completers, is that business and industry will recruit students that have not completed programs. They will come and say, well, you've got this class, and this class, I will hire you now. And then they're counted as a dropout for us, but business has gotten enough of what they think they should have. And I know y'all know I have a million analogies, but I always look at this one as years ago, I was told by a college president that you put your sidewalks where students have been walking, where their paths have made marks in the grass. That's where you come back and put your sidewalks. And that's kind of the process we're trying to look at here. Where have we been losing our students? And how do we put some stop out points in that completes them, where they really have something when they stop out? And how do we sort of flip that paradigm where they're not coming in and they're just taking an English, a math, and a psychology, and they're not getting their hands into the program? They're not getting something that would be a bite of that apple they could take with them. And so for us, I see it as a packaging of our programs in a different way that makes it much more fluid for the student and for the workforce. To me, what I get so excited about is this is a culmination of our mission statement, student success and workforce development. We're really looking at both of those entities in its entirety now. We're trying to see where do they intersect and how do we get the student the most value and the workforce the most value, because they've got somebody that really has something when they graduate. So it is repackaging and sort of redesigning what we offer in a way that hopefully will help students on a pathway. And to Wanda's point as a parent, if you have a student that stops out at this point, they've got a career ladder piece that they could now come back in a year or two. Once they decide that $18 an hour, that was pretty good before I got married and had a family. Now I'd like something a little more. And I can take another piece and add it on to it. So the Lego effect. We can build a picture now and make it a much more sustainable opportunity for students.
So Russ, what are next steps with this?
Well, it's a good question, and part of those next steps will be a function of what the board says today. Here's what I would like to do in discussions with Dr. Tidings, of course, is to potentially pursue funding opportunities so that we could, say, run an internal to TBR RFP asking college presidents to submit a plan that sort of fleshes out the broad structure here. Again, this is deliberately silent on certain implementation details, which ought to be the campuses. If we had external funding, we could then run an RFP and ask schools to pilot it, and not at a small pilot, but really a piloted at scale, at some sort of large scale, to see if it works. I think we'll know pretty quickly because, again, the dropout rates occur pretty fast currently, and so we'll know pretty quickly whether we are having more people leave college and can go into good paying jobs. But that's the idea, is to secure some external grant funding to then hopefully run an internal pilot for implementation next fall.
And does this need any sort of SACS review before we even run a pilot? No,
I don't believe so. No,
okay.
I mean, there would be, as decisions are made about which programs and their design and structure, there are, of course, going to be some SACS considerations and financial aid considerations. There's a lot of challenges there, but to run this experiment, broadly speaking, would not require any sort of approval by SACS.
Anything else from the board? At the end of the day, do you need approval from us when this becomes even more final?
Well, I would defer to Dr. Tidings directly. I would say no. I obviously, if this board thinks this is a direction worthy of us pursuing, then that obviously puts a stiff wind at our backs to then go forward. And if you thought otherwise, then that's why we want to come talk about it today with you.
Yeah, I think where the real approval process will come in is once we start actually codifying this in programmatic bites, then that will come to you for approval of program issues. As long as the concept here is something no one has issues with and knows that we're working toward restructuring of programs that would be coming to you. They will look a little different.
Okay.
And as Russ mentioned, there are some financial aid pieces that we would have to make sure we adhere to. There are some SACS things that we would have to adhere to, but with SACS, primarily, again, what they want to make sure that we're doing is SACS is more of we tell them what it is that we're doing, and then we make sure that we do what we say that we're doing. So they will, they don't dictate how that gets done. They just dictate whether or not you do it the way you say you're going to be doing it.
Any other questions or comments for Chancellor or Russ on this? If not, you know where to find both of them as you peruse this again and have thoughts along the way. So we'll look forward to not only hearing more, but hopefully, since we're all together at this upcoming board meeting, I'm sure there'll be lots of sidebar conversations as well as people digest this. All right. Thank you. As always, good work. Chancellor, as we close, I think you're going to talk to us about that June quarterly board meeting, which is just 2 short weeks away, roughly. And so I'll turn to you for that and any other announcements you have.
Yes, absolutely. Well, again, we are excited about getting together in person for this June meeting. We'll have committee chairs meeting June 16th, beginning at 1 o'clock, and then full board meeting beginning at 9:30 on the 17th. We are meeting at Columbia State Community College, and this will be our first board meeting hosted by one of our colleges since September of 2019. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but happy to be getting back to a campus. At the June meeting, we will celebrate Tennessee Board of Regents' 50th anniversary. So it's going to be just in addition to being together, we're going to be celebrating the fact that we are now turning 50. We will have a celebration with a reception and a dinner on the night of Thursday, June 16th. The Central Office 50th Anniversary Committee and also with President Janet Smith and Columbia State staff are extremely busy working on anniversary events in addition to preparing for the full board meeting. And I know that it's going to be an exciting time. They have given me a preview of some of the great things that we have on the agenda for that night. So it'll be a very special meeting with some people from our history coming to celebrate with us. So very much looking forward to that. Madam Chair, that is all I have today. I think you do have a copy of a draft agenda for the meeting in your packet, and we will be sending you any revisions to that as needed.
Excellent. Any final questions or comments for Chancellor? If not, I'm excited about June 16 and 17 and how appropriate to be at Columbia State, our very first community college in Tennessee. So put a nice bow on the 50th. That was something to look forward to. You guys, I don't believe we have any further business then for committee chairs meeting. So if there are no objections, I will adjourn this important meeting this morning, and thanks for a great dialogue. And we'll turn this over to Regent Green as we have a special meeting of the Personnel and Compensation Committee meeting. Regent Green, are you ready?
I think so. Thank you, Emily. I am calling the Committee of Personnel and Compensation of the Tennessee Board of Regents to order. Mariah, will you please call the roll and ask the necessary questions for an electronic meeting?
Yes, Madam Chair. In accordance with TCA 844-108C3, there are 2 questions that will need to be answered by regents for the record. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these 2 questions. I'll first start with the Personnel and Compensation Committee, and then we'll just verify if any other regents are remaining on the line. Regent Verdun. Regent Verdun?
He may have gone to that other meeting.
Thank you, ma'am. Regent Hatch.
Here and yes to both.
Thank you. Chair Lady Green.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Varlin.
Here and yes to both.
Regent White.
Here, yes, and yes.
Thank you. Now we'll just check for our other regents. Governor Lee. Regent Apple.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Duckett.
Here and yes to both.
Regent George. Regent Gill. Commissioner Hatcher. Regent House. Regent Powers.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Reed.
Here and yes to both.
Vice Chair Reynolds.
Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Schwinn. Regent Shelton.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Thompson. Regent Womp. Madam Chair, your board is assembled.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Next, we will need to consider the necessity of having an electronic meeting as we've done before. This meeting is being held electronically. It's the most convenient and efficient way for matters to be considered with a timely action. Given the necessity to meet electronically, and it's a non-controversial and routine item, I propose that the necessity be adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone who wants to have an individual vote on this necessity to meet electronically should feel free to object, and in which case we will have a roll vote. However, if there is no objection, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted. Is there any objection for anyone? Hearing none, the necessity is adopted. And we will proceed with the first item, which is our system-wide compensation strategies. And I'm calling on Vice Chancellor Danny Gibbs for the recommended proposal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll apologize in advance if you hear any background noise. As if on cue, they have shown up to mow my grass. So again, I apologize for that. To provide a little background information, and if you recall, each year at this meeting, we approve a system-wide compensation strategy for the system as a whole. And the proposal that we have before you today is very similar to the proposals that we have presented in the past. The state budget creates a salary pool for higher education employees equivalent to a 4% increase effective July 1, 2022. Now, the board is granted discretion to determine how the salary pool is distributed. Generally, the state, if you recall, in the past has funded about 2/3 of the cost necessary to create the salary pool. And then colleges are required to fund the remaining portion of the 4% pool. And as far as funding sources for the remaining portion of the 4% pool, if you recall historically, part of our tuition increase has been earmarked, if you would, to fund the institutional's 1/3 share of the salary increase. But of course, as Chancellor Tidings mentioned earlier, we're going to propose no tuition increase this year. So the funding for the institution's portion will come from their share of the $90 million in outcomes-based funding formula money that our schools received. So they will be able to fund their portion this year, and it will come out of the generous appropriation that we received for our outcomes-based funding formula. So that again provides you a little background on the strategies and the process. Next slide, please. So we'll look at a couple components of the system-wide strategy today. First of all, we'll talk about the system-wide salary adjustments from the 4% pool that was addressed in the governor's budget. And then we'll talk about the possibility of additional institutional or locally funded increases. Next slide. Okay, so first, adjustments from the 4% pool. This 4% salary pool will be created of salaries of all unrestricted, regular, full-time, and part-time benefit eligible employees on the payroll as of June 30th, 2022. And then the strategy would require that at least 2% of that would be issued as an across-the-board salary adjustment effective July 1st to the eligible employees. Then for the remaining 2%, the institutions would have some options. They can either give the remaining 2% as an additional across-the-board adjustment, which would bring the total to a 4% across-the-board adjustment. Or if they want to, they can use part of that 2% as a payment on the college's approved compensation plan, or they can use it for faculty promotions, or they can use it as some combination thereof. For example, if they wanted to, they could do a total of a 3% across the board and use 1% of it to pay toward their comp plan. So they will have some flexibility and options to address the needs of their individual campuses. And they will tell us soon how they would elect to use that additional 2%. They'll notify our HR office. Next slide, please. So then we will have potentially additional institutional or locally funded recurring increases. And here is where institutions would be authorized to provide additional recurring salary increases using uncommitted local funds. In other words, funded out of their local budget if they have the resources to do it. And what they would be allowed to do would be to propose additional across the board adjustments above what they did out of the 4% pool, or again, to pay on their compensation plans or to be used for faculty promotions, or again, some combination thereof. So again, this is above and beyond the 4% salary pool for those that can afford it and would request such. Eligible employees will include, again, unrestricted regular full-time and part-time employees, benefit eligible employees that were employed on or before September 30th, 2022, and are still employed at the time of payment. Now, for the locally funded increases, proposals will be submitted after or as part of the institution's October budget revision and will be subject to board approval at the December meeting. And if you recall, we changed this a few years ago to kind of get us on this cycle so that we can evaluate basically if an institution can afford these additional institutional increases. We'll look at such things as how they closed out their previous fiscal year. We'll look at their fall enrollment. You know, by that time, we will have a sneak peek on what the outcomes-based funding formula for the next year will look like. So we'll have quite a bit of data that we can review to determine if we think schools can afford to offer an additional salary increase. So that will again be addressed at your December meeting. Also, we've given institutions in the past and would propose again the possibility of one-time payments to employees. Again, these would be non-recurring payments using, again, uncommitted local funds. And often what we might see here, again, if they've had a good year, they've had their fund balances have grown, they may want to make a one-time payment to employees. We've said that one-time payment would not exceed $1,000. And again, eligible employees would be the same group, the unrestricted, regular, full-time or part-time benefit eligible employees that were employed on or before September 30th and are still employed at the time of payment. If a part-time employee receives it that are benefit eligible, it'd be prorated based on the percentage of time that they work. Proposals will be submitted again in October. And in the case of the one-time payments, the Chancellor would have the authority to approve the one-time payment request if the request meets the requirements that are outlined in this strategy and the institutions can afford it. And the reason that the Chancellor, we've asked that she would have the authority to approve these, it would be so that the payments could be made in advance of the holidays coming up, either Thanksgiving or Christmas holidays. That would allow the payments to be made by then. Whereas if we waited until the December board meeting, it would be too late to get those into those payment cycles. However, the payments that are approved will be reported to the board at the December board meeting as an interim action item. So with that, I believe that completes the presentation that I wanted to make regarding the compensation strategies. And Madam Chair, we will entertain any questions or otherwise staff would recommend approval.
Thanks, Danny. I know we've had numerous conversations about this and other topics that we'll probably discuss later. But do we have any other questions for Danny regarding the system-wide compensation strategies? As Danny mentioned, this is something that we've done year over year with our June meeting. All right, if we don't have any questions, I will call for a motion.
So moved, Hatch.
Thank you, Joey. In a second.
Seconds, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. All right, and Mariah, will you have a roll call vote for us?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Lady Green.
Aye.
Regent Hatch.
Aye.
Regent Barlin.
Aye.
And Regent White.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Sounds good. Thank you. If there's no other further business to come before the Personnel and Compensation Committee, this committee stands adjourned. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you very much. You guys do good work and quickly. We will now turn to the Audit Committee, and we'll turn this over to Regent Hatch.
All right. Thanks, Regent Reynolds. Make sure I'm on the right page here. I've got Zoom fatigue this morning. I know some of y'all do too. So I will call the meeting of the Audit Committee to order and ask Secretary Mariah Perry to call the roll.
Thank you, Chairman Hatch. In accordance with TCA 844-108C3, we will need our regents to answer those two questions just once more. First, can the regent simultaneously hear and speak with others participating in the meeting? And second, is the regent alone in the room? If the answer to both questions is yes, the regent can simply answer yes to both questions. Anyone who is not alone should identify any other people present in the room with the regent. When I call your name, please answer these two questions. I'll first call for the Audit Committee members, and then we'll check for other board members remaining on the line. Regent Apple.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Verdun. Regent Duckett.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Hatch.
Yes to both questions.
Regent Green.
Yes to both questions.
And now I'll check for our other regents. Governor Lee. Regent George. Regent Gill. Commissioner Hatcher. Regent House. Regent Powers.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Reed.
Yes, and here to both, and yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair Reynolds.
Here and yes to both.
Commissioner Schwinn. Regent Shelton.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Thompson. Regent Barlin.
Here and yes to both.
Regent Wamp. And Regent White.
Here and yes to both.
Chairman Hatch, your committee is assembled.
Thank you. So this meeting is being held electronically as it is the most economically efficient way, and the matters to be considered require timely action and a review by the Audit Committee. Given that the necessity to meet electronically is a non-controversial and routine item, I propose that the necessity be adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone who wants to have individual votes on the necessity to meet electronically should feel free to object, in which case we'll have a roll call vote. If there's no objection, the necessity to meet electronically is adopted. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the necessity is adopted, and we'll move into the agenda. So section 1, informational reporting. The highlights of audit findings and recommendations are contained on page 2 of your information, and I'm going to call on Mike Batson for his report.
Thank you, Regent Hatch, Madam Vice Chair, other Audit Committee members, and other board members. Thank you for being here. First, on highlights, we want to cover the Veterans Affairs audit. If you recall, this past year, based on risks we had seen from external audits and reviews, we required that the community college auditors perform a VA benefits audit at each campus. We did not require internal audits for those campuses who had received an external audit either from the state approving agency at THEC or from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs within the last year. Pellissippi State and Columbia and Roane State had external reviews or were undergoing them at the time, so they did not do those audits. And we have received, I think, about 5 or 6 of the remaining audits that were in your materials. And actually, we've received several others since your materials were sent out. Each community college has a school certifying official who's responsible for determining allowable tuition and fee benefits, tracking withdrawals and grades, and reporting benefits and student status to the VA. For most of the colleges, those are performed by one person at the college. operates as the school certifying official. The recommendations we found, just to kind of summarize those, and these are really consistent across the ones that are in your materials as well as the ones we received in last week. A need for a defined list of required items that should be available in the student's VA file at the college, timeliness of notice of indebtedness letters. That's in a case where a student, say, withdraws from courses and it affects their benefits, reduces their benefits. The VA will send a notice of indebtedness for the college to repay that money. We did see some issues with timeliness there. Also need for supervisory review or independent review. As I mentioned, most of those individuals, it's a one-person shop. They're kind of on their own, and we have seen a need based on errors and things we've seen in previous audits that there needs to be somebody reviewing that work, at least on a sample basis. However, 3 important results that came from this audit that aren't necessarily addressed specifically in those reports that I want to touch on. First, we touched on this a little bit, but guidance in terms of what should be in those student files, whether that's electronically in Banner, a paper file, or somewhere available at the college. There were differences in interpretation from the school certifying official handbook for what should be required. And we have worked with Jonathan Button. He's worked with the state approving agency at THEC, and they have developed a draft document for what should be required, and so that we can have consistency going forward at the colleges and make sure those school certifying officials know what's expected of them and what they should be having in the file. We didn't really see any errors or concerns there, but there were variances from one school to the next of what they had on file, as well as interpretations of what VA requires. And so we're going to get clarification on that. And they issued a draft last week that should help going forward there. Next is international studies fees, the mandatory fee that not all colleges have, but some colleges do have a mandatory international studies fee. We saw variances in the guidance that some of the colleges had received as to whether that was an allowable benefit. Some colleges had documentation saying it is allowable, some had saying it is not allowable. And through the course of this audit, we have worked with, again, Student Success, Jonathan Button, and he's worked with THEC. And last week we did receive definitive guidance on that. So going forward, all the colleges will be on the same footing in terms of that fee. Again, not a large fee, but it's nice that from one side of the state to the other, we do have consistent guidance on how that is treated in terms of VA benefits. So again, another important value for this audit. Third, and probably most important, is there was sort of, as I mentioned, these offices are one-person shops. We did see what tends to be a high turnover rate for those positions. There's been a lack of oversight and cohesiveness among the colleges, those positions. They're sort of standalone. There's not generally a lot of collaboration between them. In contrast to, say, our financial aid officers or internal audit or our business officers, where they've had that connection across the state. And we think that would help in a lot of ways in terms of consistency in what they're doing, cohesiveness. It probably might indirectly help turnover there, because I think some of them kind of feel like they stand alone out there. Student Success has already started working with those, and they are providing more direct guidance and resources. And so that's another great benefit there, is they're pulling those together. Again, Jonathan Button, who apparently has an infinite amount of time, but he's helping with those. And that's, again, I think going to be a real help for those officers at the campuses going forward. And so, again, so 3, I think, great benefits that came from this audit. And hopefully going forward, we'll be able to reduce risks in those areas and help the VA students make sure they get what they need in a timely manner and that it's consistent whatever college that they go to. If there are any questions on those VA audits, I'd be glad to answer those. Hearing none, I'll move forward to highlights on recommendations and findings. I will say a little bit of good news, but there's going to be a however at the end of this. So you will see some improvement in the public session materials that you received a couple of weeks ago in terms of clearing recommendations. You'll see even more when we go to executive session in terms of the older stale ones. In addition, I will say that in the 2 weeks since the public session materials went out, we have had several others that have been cleared since then or in the process of being cleared, especially some stale ones that we'll talk about a little bit later. However, that's not enough. I don't think we need to do better. We need to do better as auditors, and we need to do better in terms of campus officials and management and getting these things cleared out. So we're working on several initiatives to help resolve that and get those things moving forward. First of all, after discussions with Chancellor Tidings last week on some of these, you'll see on your screen a typical recommendation log, and we have added a column to that. A little surprise for the vice chancellors out there, but we've added a responsible TBR vice chancellor. That does not mean they're responsible for clearing those recommendations at the campus, but we will be informing them of recommendations and findings that sort of fall into their area at the campuses so that they can be informed about that and be a resource for those and help the campuses move forward. We've done that informally in the past. We haven't put that on the log, but when there may be a more challenging recommendation or some differences of opinion, we have asked the vice chancellor or some of their staff to step in and help the campuses. And that's been very successful. And this is going to more formalize that to where they will receive from me the recommendations that are out there for their area. They're not going to get all of them, but, say, Danny Gibbs will receive any that are related to business and finance, or Alicia going forward, so that they can be aware of that. If there needs to be assistance, if things start sitting, then that's another resource that we can help. I think that's a good idea to formalize that. Another thing that we're doing, we're also reviewing and trying to improve our internal audit processes for tracking and looking at progress and completion on those. I'm going to be tweaking what we do with the auditors and what we're asking them to do in terms of follow-up on those so that it is more timely. Some of you remember a few years ago, we changed what we were doing with the audit committee materials in terms of our timing. And in short, we moved that up so that this group was receiving the most up-to-date information. In the past, sometimes what you received was 6-8 weeks old by the time it got to audit committee. And so we changed that timing. But I'm looking at doing that again, taking that a step further. And we'll talk about that more probably in executive session, but we want to move that forward to where you're getting more up-to-date information. We'll also be looking at more clearly defined measures of what's completed in terms of recommendations. If there's a recommendation for internal controls or a policy, is doing the policy enough to clear that, or do we need follow-up to make sure that it's working as intended? And so we're going to try to more clearly define that going forward to help expedite recommendations being cleared. We'll also be a little more intentional in how recommendations are worded in some cases to help there also. I mentioned earlier that several items have been cleared or potentially cleared once your materials went out. For an example, on pages, I think 5 and 6, Jackson State, Crystal informed me last week that she had just received documentation for several of those recommendations that were stale. We think those will be cleared and shown as cleared at the next meeting. But just to let you know that she has that information, it's just come in and she's looking at that, but she thinks that could go a long way in clearing those recommendations on those pages. So that's sort of my take on where we're at and what we're trying to do going forward on the recommendations. Again, we'll talk about some of the limited official use ones a little later in private session, but I'll pause for a minute to see if there are any questions or comments on that process.
Yeah, I've got a comment. I like that column you've added, Mike, to kind of help with that responsibility for someone to see after those and try to get those wrapped up quicker.
Thank you, Regent Hatch, and I will give credit to Chancellor Tidings. It was her recommendation to formalize that and put that on the logs. Thank you. Regent Hatch, that's all I have in terms of highlights today, unless there are any questions on any other.
All right, thanks, Mike. We'll move to item B, the audit reports and reviews. So this information was provided to all the committee members from page 17 to 20. If anyone has any questions or comments that they have, we'll call on Mike for that. If no items or questions are pulled for discussion, we'll move to the next session or section. So anyone have any questions? Hearing none, this is information item only and requires no action. So on to item 1C, system-wide internal audit updates. And again, back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Regent Hatch. Just a couple of things on our internal audit updates. First is I want to introduce our new system-wide internal audit director, Jackie Struckmeyer. Jackie comes to us from Austin P. She was the controller there for 6 years. Previous to that, she was in internal audit for about 14 or 15 years. I think 4 years as an internal auditor and then approximately 10 years as the director of internal audit. So great experience there, and she's already doing great things for us and helping. A lot of this you're seeing with the recommendations and all that is having her here is making a lot of that possible. And so we're going to certainly use her skills and her experience going forward. Again, a lot of experience with Banner doing financial statements at Austin P. And so that's really something we've been looking for in internal audit, that's somebody that has that detailed experience with Banner, and that will be a great help. So I'll introduce Jackie. She's on camera. I don't know if she wants to make any comments, but glad to have her and just want everybody to be able to put a face with her name.
I don't really have much to say. I just want to say thank you very much, and I am very happy to be with the board and to be working with Mike again. When I was in internal audit, most of the auditors that are in the system were there when I was in audit, and I'm very happy to be working with everyone again. So very thankful to be here.
Thank you, Jackie. The only other update I wanted to mention was in April, we had a virtual training session for the auditors, 5 hours of continuing education. It included a Qualitative demonstration, which is the software that TBR is using for the business continuity plans, ransomware attacks and lessons learned, as well as the effects of ransomware on internal audit. And then Brian Lapps also gave us a very good presentation on privacy issues. So again, that was a very good session for 5 hours virtually. A lot of good information there. That's all I have, Regent Hatch, on highlights.
All right, thanks, Mike, and welcome aboard, Jackie. Again, this is information only and requires no action. The next item, item 1D, is university updates. This information is on page 40 of your materials. Mike, back to you for the report.
University updates, the comptroller's audits of the LGIs are presented to you, as you know, based on the board's continuing fiduciary responsibilities for those universities related to bond finance. Austin P, again, thank you, Austin P, for Jackie. Austin P had no findings, as well as MTSU. Those two did not. And then ETSU had two public findings. One was a limited official use finding, and the other was that they did not have proper collection procedures for accounts receivable. University of Memphis had one public finding related to improving procedures for financial statement reporting. And that is all for the university updates. Regent Hatch.
All right. Thanks again. This is information only and requires no action. The next item, section 2, is the consent agenda. We'll have one vote at the end of section 2. So you have been provided the materials regarding the items on this consent agenda. If any member wishes to discuss anything, we can pull it and have the agenda item discussed. If no items are pulled, we'll move to the roll call vote. If any item is pulled, we'll call on Mike Batson for a report before the vote. So are there any items that any of the committee members wish to discuss? And this is review of revisions to fiscal year 2022 audit plans. Mike, does that need any discussion from you at this point?
No, we go over these at each meeting. We have the revisions. Again, these are all pretty typical in terms of new requests that come up, say from a president or somebody on campus, and the auditor may move things back. Frequently, they will contact me and ask about shuffling things on those. And of course, if a president asks for something that they need reviewed, we want to give that priority over some other things. The CARES Act audit, you'll notice that is deferred on some. We have talked with a lot of people about that, and based on the deadlines for that moving back from the feds and some different information there, we decided to push that back into the next fiscal year just so we can get a little more concrete guidance there. And since the college's deadlines were moved back, we didn't really want to start auditing that in the middle of their deadlines. And so that's just a management type decision there, is to move that one back. I think it's a little more efficient for the colleges as well as the auditors.
All right, thanks. So this section does require a roll call vote. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Mary Lou.
Thanks, Mary Lou. Do we have a second?
Second, Wanda.
Thanks, Wanda. Any discussion? All right, I'll call on Secretary Perry for the roll call vote.
Regent Apple.
Aye.
Regent Duckett.
Aye.
Chairman Hatch.
Aye.
And Regent Green.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to section 3, review of system-wide internal audit budget for FY 2023. Mike, back to you on the report for this item.
Thank you, Regent Hatch. Not really much to discuss here. It's really unchanged. We work with business and finance to determine the budget, and it's essentially the same as last year, but the only increase is mainly due to the addition of the director position, Jackie's position, in terms of salary and benefits. So it really stayed the same essentially from last year. We didn't request anything additionally. So again, very basic budget here. So thank you, Regent Hatch.
All righty. Any questions for Mike on the budget? Hearing none, this does require a roll call vote. Do we have a motion for a roll call vote?
So moved, Yolanda.
Thanks, Regent Green. Do we have a second?
Second, Greg.
Thanks, Greg. Any discussion? All right, I'll call on Secretary Perry for the roll call vote.
Regent Apple,
Aye.
Regent Duckett,
Aye.
Chairman Hatch,
Aye.
and Regent Green.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So this concludes the agenda for the public session. Unless anyone has any further business to come before the committee, public portion of the audit committee meeting stands adjourned. We'll announce that the public session has concluded and that board members, board officers, and key audit personnel should have received information to join the executive